On his 47th birthday, December 28, 1985, a deputy of the City Council, an honored teacher of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, and a master of sports in mountain tourism named Anatoly Slivko, was arrested directly inside his tourist club headquarters. When operatives placed handcuffs on his wrists, he shouted indignantly, "You will regret this! You've arrested a shock worker of labor and a deputy." 3 hours later, this model Soviet citizen began confessing. 7 dead boys, more than 50 children subjected to horrific experiments, 40 hours of videotapes hidden in a secret compartment. For 21 years, he was the idol of children and the hero of his city. For 21 years, no one suspected what was happening behind the closed doors of his club. This is the story of a man with 2 faces, Anatoly Slivko, the Nevinnomyssk maniac. December 28, 1938. In the Dagestani city of Izberbash, a child was born whom his mother had tried to prevent from entering this world. She had attempted to terminate the pregnancy. The second child was unwanted. The birth was difficult. The boy was born premature, strangled by the umbilical cord during delivery. He barely survived. His father, Emelian Slivko, had relocated the family from central Russia to Dagestan for work in the oil fields. But after the birth of their second son, the relationship between the spouses deteriorated completely. The atmosphere at home became cold and tense. Tolik, as he was called in childhood, grew up as a sickly and withdrawn child. Constant headaches, insomnia, weak health. He spent more time at home than in the yard with other children. He had almost no friends. His mother treated him with coldness, as if blaming him for all the family's problems. Summer of 1942. Tolik was 4 years old. One day, the 4-year-old boy witnessed a scene that burned an indelible mark into his memory. On the street, a German soldier killed a stray dog. A 10-year-old boy in a pioneer uniform, white shirt, red neckerchief, and shining black boots, rushed to defend the animal. The German turned and shot the child with his submachine gun right before little Tolik's eyes. Blood on the white shirt, the red neckerchief on the asphalt, the agony of the dying teenager. These images lodged themselves in the mind of the 4-year-old witness and never let go. Slivko grew up, received pedagogical education at college, got a job at the Nevinnomyssk nitrogen fertilizer plant as a chemical engineer, and worked part-time as a school teacher. In 1960, he married. Soon, 2 children were born, a son and a daughter. Outwardly, everything looked exemplary. Komsomol member, then Communist Party member, responsible worker, caring family man, spring of 1961, Nevinnomyssk. But at 23 years old, Slivko witnessed a traffic accident that changed him forever. A car struck and killed a teenage boy. The child was dressed in formal pioneer uniform, white shirt, scarlet neckerchief, dark school suit, and polished black boots shining like mirrors. The dying teenager's agony, the convulsions, the loss of consciousness triggered powerful sexual arousal in Slivko. It was a shock. He realized for the first time that the image of a boy in pioneer uniform dying excited him more than anything else in his life. The image from his childhood in 1942 merged with what he had just witnessed. From that moment, the fantasy became an obsession that completely consumed his consciousness. A forensic psychiatric examination, conducted twice, including an evaluation at the famous Serbsky Institute in Moscow, revealed a whole bouquet of severe pathologies: organic psychopathy, pedophilia, necrophilia, sadism, necrosadism, fetishism, vampirism, pyromania. But the most terrifying aspect was this: All these deviations concentrated on one specific image: a boy in pioneer uniform losing consciousness. Early 1960s, Nevinnomyssk, Anatoly Slivko understood the nature of his desires and began methodically creating conditions for their realization. In the early 1960s, he organized a tourist club called Chergid. The name was an abbreviation for Cherkis Raid of Hydropower Builders. The club was established at the Nevinnomyssk nitrogen fertilizer plant where Slivko worked and was intended for children of plant employees. He proved to be a brilliant teacher with genuine talent for working with teenagers. Slivko led his students on multi-day expeditions through the mountains of the North Caucasus. He taught survival skills in extreme conditions: mountaineering, rock climbing, orienteering. Children returned from expeditions tanned, strengthened, full of impressions. Parents were delighted. The fame of Chergid spread far beyond Nevinnomyssk. Teachers from other cities across the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic came to Slivko to learn from his experience. He spoke at all-union conferences on tourism. He published articles in methodological journals. The club received recognition as one of the best in the country. Parallel to his tourism activities, Slivko built an impeccable public reputation. He joined the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, a mandatory attribute for leadership positions. He became a shock worker of communist labor, an honorary title for production leaders. He received the title of Honored Teacher of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, the highest award for educators. He earned the title of Master of Sports of the USSR in mountain tourism, a rare achievement. He was elected deputy of the city council, real power at the local level. Parents didn't just trust him with their children. They were proud that their sons were studying at the club under such an outstanding person. Mothers themselves called Slivko, begging him to take their boys into Chergid, even if the groups were overcrowded. Fathers thanked him for making real men out of their sons. In 1974, the club moved to a new spacious building on Mendeleev Street, and in 1982 to an even larger facility on Severnaya Street. This was no longer just a club. It was a real center with several halls, equipment storage, a photo laboratory, and utility rooms. It was in the utility rooms that Slivko equipped a special room for his experiments. He assembled professional photo and video equipment, expensive technology by Soviet standards. Through acquaintances who were chemists, he purchased substances for sedation, ether, chloroform, other agents. He acquired medical equipment, gas masks, rubber hoses, ropes of various thicknesses. All of this was stored in a locked cabinet to which only he had the key. Under the guise of creating documentary films about tourism work, shooting for methodological manuals, and preparing articles for pedagogical journals, he created the perfect cover. No one, not parents, not colleagues, not the police, would dare to doubt the intentions of a respected deputy and honored teacher when he invited boys for individual sessions. The trap was ready. 1964 to 1985, 21 years of crimes. Slivko carefully selected candidates from among his club members. He was interested in boys aged 11 to 15 of a specific type: thin, delicate facial features, often from troubled or single-parent families. He chose difficult teenagers, those who already had behavioral problems, those whose parents exercised poor control. The disappearance of such a child would not cause immediate panic. Everyone would think he had run away from home again or gone off wandering. The methodology was refined to the smallest detail after the first experiments. Slivko would invite the selected boy to an individual meeting after regular sessions or on a weekend. The pretexts were diverse and convincing: filming a documentary about the club's work to be shown on city television, a photo session for an article in the all-union magazine Tourist, participation in a scientific experiment studying the limits of human capabilities in extreme conditions. He told teenagers he was writing a book about methods of providing first aid in the mountains and needed to know precisely how a person loses and regains consciousness under various injuries, or that he was preparing a report for a medical institute about the body's reactions to oxygen deprivation. Slivko was convincing. His authority, his scientific terminology, his serious tone left no room for doubt. Before each experiment, the boy signed a handwritten receipt, the text of which Slivko had prepared in advance. The document stated, "Being of sound mind and solid memory, without any coercion, I agreed to undergo a medical experiment involving loss of consciousness. I swear to keep the fact of participation in the experiment and its results in complete secrecy and never under any circumstances tell anyone." Signature. Date. This receipt became a psychological lock. Even if the child survived and remembered something, he would be afraid to tell, considering himself an accomplice. Then began the ritual recreating the image from the 1961 accident. The child was dressed in formal pioneer uniform: white shirt, red neckerchief, dark trousers, black boots polished to a mirror shine. If Slivko didn't have the right size, he would buy or sew the uniform specifically for the victim in advance. The method of inducing unconsciousness varied. Sometimes Slivko placed a noose made of rope or rubber hose around the victim, slow strangulation. Sometimes he used a gas mask through which sedative gas was supplied, ether or chloroform. Sometimes he placed a tight plastic bag over the head. In all cases, the boy lost consciousness from hypoxia, oxygen deprivation to the brain. The entire process was meticulously documented. Slivko set up a camera on a tripod, adjusted the lighting, took photographs at different stages. He filmed how the child lost consciousness, how the body went limp, how the eyes rolled back. While the boy was unconscious, the maniac committed sexual acts, masturbated before the lifeless body. The investigation discovered more than 40 hours of videotapes and hundreds of photographs, a massive collection that Slivko stored in a special hiding place. In most cases, approximately 43 times over 21 years, Slivko saved the victim. He performed chest compressions, artificial respiration, applied smelling salts. The child regained consciousness in confusion, remembering nothing about what happened during the unconscious state, or remembering vaguely as in a dream. The signed receipt and Slivko's authority compelled silence. Many received money, 25 to 30 rubles, equivalent to a kindergarten teacher's monthly salary. This was enormous money for a teenager. Over 21 years, approximately 50 children went through these experiments. Some participated only once. Others Slivko called back repeatedly. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. They became dependent on the money, on the attention of an authoritative adult, on the feeling of being chosen. But 7 times, the experiment went too far. Sometimes Slivko deliberately did not resuscitate the victim, bringing the fantasy to its logical conclusion. Sometimes he became so absorbed in the process that he missed the moment when it was still possible to bring the child back to life. The boy died from hypoxia. After death began the second phase of the ritual, recreating the visual images from that 1961 car accident. Slivko took a knife and dismembered the corpse, severing the limbs. He arranged body parts in different poses and photographed them, creating an imitation of remains scattered after a car crash. Then he poured gasoline over the parts and set them on fire, recreating the image of a burning body, the smell of burning flesh, the sight of charred bones. The picture was complete. Slivko transported the burned remains out of the city in his car and buried them in the forest in different locations. He carefully selected remote areas where people rarely appeared. He covered the graves with leaves and branches. Over 2 decades, he created his own cemetery in the forests around Nevinnomyssk. Nikolai Dobryshev, 15 years old, 1964. The first murder occurred in 1964 when Slivko did not yet have his own tourist club. 15-year-old Nikolai was a troubled teenager from a dysfunctional family who regularly ran away from home, had conflicts with his parents, and skipped school. Slivko met him through mutual acquaintances and invited him to an experiment. When Nikolai didn't return home, his mother went to the police. The local police officer didn't even open a missing person case. In his opinion, the teenager had simply run away from home again, as he had done before. The mother begged them to conduct a search, but received a refusal. The case was closed without an investigation even beginning. Slivko failed to resuscitate Nikolai, having become absorbed in the process of masturbation. When he realized the boy was dead, he panicked. But after a few days, he understood. No one was even looking for the child. The police weren't interested in the disappearance. The relatives had accepted it. This discovery became a revelation for him. He understood his invulnerability. Slivko dismembered Nikolai's body and dumped it in the Kuban River. The remains of the first victim were never found. Alexei Kovalenko, age unknown, May 1965. A year later, in May 1965, Alexei Kovalenko died under similar circumstances. Very little is known about him. Even his age was not preserved in the documents. Slivko dismembered his body, burned the parts, and buried them in the forest. When the parents reported their son's disappearance, the police again stated that the boy had run away and stopped the search without investigation. After 2 successful murders, Slivko believed in his own impunity, but his caution prevailed. He understood he needed to wait to avoid drawing attention. Unidentified teenager, 14 years old, November 14, 1973. The next murder occurred only 8 years later, on November 14, 1973. A 14-year-old boy disappeared whose identity the investigation could not establish even after Slivko's arrest. Perhaps he was a homeless street child whom no one monitored and whose disappearance no one reported, or a child from another city who ended up in Nevinnomyssk by chance. In the winter of 1975, one of the prisoners confessed that he knew the burial location of the missing boy, but his testimony proved false. He was trying to soften his own sentence. The trail of this victim was lost forever. Alexander Nesmyanov, 15 years old, January 1975. In January 1975, 15-year-old Alexander Nesmyanov died. Little information about him was preserved as well. By the time of the 1986 trial, 11 years had passed. Many details had faded from the memory of witnesses and from Slivko himself. Andrei Pogasyan, 11 years old, September 19, 1977. On September 19, 1977, 11-year-old Andrei Pogasyan became a victim, the youngest of Slivko's known victims. The boy was a member of Chergid. His parents completely trusted the club's leader. When Andrei didn't return home after what was supposed to be an individual training session, Slivko personally helped the parents search for the missing boy. He participated in search operations, posted notices, consoled the grief-stricken mother, Sergei Fatnev, 13 years old, April 21, 1980. On April 21, 1980, 13-year-old Sergei Fatnev became the next victim. After killing the boy, Slivko engaged in dismemberment with particular thoroughness. He severed the limbs, arranged them in various positions, and photographed each composition. The investigation would later discover these photographs in his collection. Sergei's parents organized large-scale searches, recruited volunteers, appealed to all authorities. The police conducted an investigation, but it reached a dead end. No leads could be found. The missing person case was closed as unsolved. Sergei Pavlov, 13 years old. July 23, 1985. The last murder occurred on July 23, 1985, and proved fatal for Slivko. 13-year-old Sergei Pavlov was an active member of Chergid. He dreamed of big expeditions. The day before his disappearance, he boasted to his neighbor, Maria Ivanovna, that tomorrow afternoon he was going to meet with Anatoly Emelianich. The club leader had promised to photograph him for an article in Tourist magazine. When Sergei didn't return in the evening, his parents immediately raised the alarm. His mother remembered the neighbor's words about the meeting with Slivko. This boast by a 13-year-old boy became the thread that, 5 months later, would lead the investigation to the maniac. Besides the 7 murdered, another 36 boys were subjected to sexual assault during the experiments, but survived thanks to resuscitation. Many of them received severe psychological trauma for life. They suffered from nightmares, panic attacks. They were afraid to trust adults. For more than 10 years, teenage boys periodically disappeared in Nevinnomyssk and the surrounding areas, but investigations repeatedly reached dead ends. The police attributed the disappearances to runaways from home, teenage vagrancy, accidents in the mountains or on the river. No one saw a pattern, but there were witnesses and leads. Several boys who went through the experiments and survived tried to tell their parents about the strange meetings with Slivko. One of the teenagers showed his mother money, 30 rubles, an enormous sum for a schoolboy, and said that Anatoly Emelianich had given it to him for participating in a scientific experiment. The mother paid no attention. What a good man! He even gave money. Another boy complained to his father that after the experiment, his neck hurt for several days and he felt dizzy. The father took his son to a doctor, but no one thought to connect the symptoms to Slivko's actions. A third teenager told a school psychologist directly that the leader of Chergid was conducting strange experiments with them involving loss of consciousness. The psychologist decided the child was fantasizing or had misunderstood harmless medical lectures about first aid. After all, only positive fame circulated about Slivko in the city. The main problem was the maniac's impeccable reputation. Deputy of the City Council, honored teacher of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, master of sports of the USSR, member of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, shock worker of labor, a man who had raised hundreds of children, led them into the mountains, made real men out of them. How could anyone suspect such a person of monstrous crimes? Even when investigators noticed that several missing boys had been members of Chergid, this didn't arouse suspicion. The club was the largest in the city. Dozens of children studied there. It was logical that some of the missing could be his students. Just a coincidence. Nothing more. Slivko himself actively helped in the searches. He provided the police with photographs of missing children from the club's archive. He organized search groups from his students, to comb the surrounding areas. He comforted parents, promising that the boys would definitely be found. His participation in the investigations was perceived as civic duty, not as the actions of a killer returning to the scene of the crime. Moreover, an unspoken directive existed in the Soviet system not to sensationalize crimes against children. The party leadership of Nevinnomyssk didn't want the city to become famous for a series of unsolved disappearances. It negatively affected statistics, damaged the city's image, created panic among the population. Therefore, each case was examined in isolation, as a separate incident, not as part of a series. A wall of silence created by Slivko's authority, the indifference of the system, and the fear of surviving victims stood for 21 years. After the disappearance of Sergei Pavlov on July 23, 1985, his parents immediately contacted the police. His mother remembered that the neighbor had mentioned Sergei was going to meet with Slivko. This detail made it into the protocol. The missing person case landed on the desk of Tamara Vasilyevna Langeva, assistant prosecutor of Nevinnomyssk, an experienced investigator with a sharp analytical mind. Studying the materials, she noticed Slivko's name. Pulled archives showed that at least 2 other missing boys had been members of Chergid and were last seen with the club's leader. Langeva began cautious questioning among former and current members of Chergid. After lengthy persuasion, several teenagers told her about strange experiments, about receipts, about loss of consciousness, about the prohibition against telling anyone. They were afraid they would be accused of complicity, but the investigator promised them protection. When Langeva reported her suspicions to the prosecutor of Nevinnomyssk, he categorically refused to proceed with the investigation. Slivko was too respected. To accuse a deputy of the city council, an honored teacher, a hero of the city of such monstrous crimes based on the testimony of a few teenagers, this was a political scandal that could destroy careers. But Langeva did not back down. She collected more testimony, established the connection between all the missing boys and Slivko, compiled a detailed report. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, the prosecutor finally signed a warrant to search the premises of the tourist club Chergid and Slivko's apartment. December 28, 1985, birthday and arrest. On the morning of December 28th, on his 47th birthday, Anatoly Slivko was receiving congratulations at the club. By noon, a group of operatives arrived. They politely asked everyone to leave the premises and presented the search warrant. Slivko was absolutely confident. He indignantly demanded explanations, waived his deputy's identification, threatened complaints to the regional party committee. "You will regret this. You've arrested the wrong person." The search lasted 3 hours. In a locked cabinet in the utility room, they found a hiding place. Videotapes, dozens of cassettes with recordings of experiments, photographs, hundreds of images of boys in pioneer uniforms at various stages of losing consciousness, photographs of dismembered bodies, chemical substances, ether, chloroform, nooses made of ropes and rubber hoses, gas masks, medical equipment. When Slivko was shown the first videotape, his
Первое преступление было совершено примерно в 1973 году. При проведении эксперимента с мальчиком Сашей Несмеяновым он скончался, и я похоронил его в лесу.
Body of the first victim, Nikolai Dobryshev, could not be found. Slivko had dumped it in the Kuban River more than 20 years earlier, and the current had carried the remains away. During the investigation and later at trial, Slivko constantly cried, displayed remorse, asked for forgiveness. He told investigators, "What will be presented now disgraces even the human race." But his tears made no impression. Experts saw in them only an attempt to soften the sentence. June 1986, Nevinnomyssk. The trial of Anatoly Slivko took place in June 1986 in the Nevinnomyssk City Court building. The proceedings were held behind closed doors due to the nature of the crimes. Only judges, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, relatives of the victims, and several representatives of party organs were present in the courtroom. The key question was the defendant's sanity. A forensic psychiatric examination was conducted twice, the first time in Stavropol, the second time at the prestigious Serbsky Institute in Moscow. Both examinations gave identical conclusions. Despite multiple mental disorders, Slivko was deemed sane. Experts confirmed the presence of organic psychopathy, pedophilia, necrophilia, sadism, necrosadism, fetishism, vampirism, and pyromania. But they determined that at the time of committing the crimes, Slivko fully understood the nature and social danger of his actions, could control them, and could have chosen not to commit them. He carefully planned each crime, took measures to conceal evidence, understood the illegality of his actions. This excluded a finding of insanity. At trial, the defendant attempted to justify himself. He claimed that all 7 deaths were tragic accidents, miscalculations in timing the resuscitation. Slivko insisted he didn't want to kill the children. The experiments simply went too far. He didn't manage to bring the boys back to life in time. The prosecutor demolished this version by showing the videotapes. On the footage, it was clear that Slivko deliberately prolonged the strangulation process, didn't rush with resuscitation, became absorbed in masturbation while the victim was dying. The dismemberment and burning of bodies in no way fit the version of accidental death. August 12, 1986. The judge read the verdict. Anatoly Emelianich Slivko was found guilty of 7 episodes of murder under aggravating circumstances, 7 episodes of sexual assault against minors, and 7 cases of desecration of corpses. The sentence: capital punishment, death by firing squad. The defense attorney immediately filed a petition for clemency to the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR and a motion for a third, repeat psychiatric examination. This allowed postponement of the sentence's execution. Slivko was transferred to a solitary death row cell in Novocherkassk prison. He spent the next 3 years waiting. The Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR reviewed the clemency petition, then denied it. The repeat examination confirmed the previous conclusions. All legal procedures were exhausted. September 1989, Novocherkassk prison. A few weeks before the sentence was carried out, a strange episode occurred that entered criminal chronicles. Rostov detective Viktor Burakov was investigating a series of brutal murders in Rostov Oblast. A maniac nicknamed the Forest Strip Killer had, by that time, killed at least 29 people, predominantly children and young women. The investigation had reached a dead end. Burakov was searching for any leads, trying to understand the psychology of a serial killer. Someone suggested an unusual idea to him: request a consultation from another serial killer, Anatoly Slivko, who at that time was awaiting execution in Novocherkassk prison. Burakov made an official request. The prison administration permitted the interview. Slivko agreed. perhaps hoping that cooperation with the investigation would somehow affect his fate. The interview took place in the death row cell. Slivko talked about his motives, about how he selected victims, how he planned crimes, how he avoided suspicion. Burakov asked questions about the psychological profile of the killer, about possible search locations. But all of Slivko's recommendations proved erroneous and didn't help the investigation at all. Perhaps he deliberately gave false advice. Perhaps he simply couldn't understand the psychology of a different type of killer. The forest strip killer, Andrei Chikatilo, would only be caught a year later in November 1990, and he would confess to the murder of 53 people, September 16, 1989. A few hours after the interview with Burakov, in the early morning of September 16, 1989, Anatoly Slivko was led out of the death row cell. Capital punishment in the USSR was executed by a shot to the back of the head. The procedure took several minutes, from his arrest on December 28, 1985, to his execution on September 16, 1989. 3 years and 9 months had passed. 21 years of crimes ended with a single shot in a prison basement. The story of Anatoly Slivko became one of the most shocking criminal cases in the history of the Soviet Union. For 2 decades, the maniac hid behind the mask of a model citizen, teacher, and public figure, and no one could recognize the monster beneath that mask. His case demonstrated how reputation and social status become the perfect cover for a serial killer. Parents themselves brought their children to the man who was killing them. Authorities awarded him honorary titles. Colleagues admired his pedagogical talent. Society created a protective cocoon around him through which the truth could not break. The Slivko case revealed critical problems in the work of the Soviet law enforcement system. For more than 10 years, the police ignored children's disappearances, automatically attributing them to runaways from home. Testimony from surviving victims was not properly investigated. Children weren't believed when they tried to tell about strange experiments. The obvious connection of all the missing boys to Slivko and his club went unnoticed because no one wanted to see a pattern. 7 boys died: Nikolai Dobryshev, Alexei Kovalenko, an unidentified teenager, Alexander Nesmeyanov, Andrei Pogasyan, Sergei Fatnev, Sergei Pavlov. Dozens of children who went through the experiments and survived received severe psychological trauma that they live with to this day. The city of Nevinnomyssk will forever remember its honored teacher as one of the most brutal serial killers in the country's history. In memory of the victims of Anatoly Slivko, Nikolai Dobryshev, 15 years old, 1964, Alexei Kovalenko, 1965, unidentified teenager, 14 years old, 1973, Alexander Nesmeyanov, 15 years old, 1975, Andrei Pogasyan, 11 years old, 1977, Sergei Fatnev, 13 years old, 1980, Sergei Pavlov, 13 years old, 1985,